We don't waste time on window shoppers." The words sliced through the pristine air of the luxury car showroom, drawing smirks from the well-heeled customers browsing million-dollar vehicles. The mechanic's calloused hands, still bearing traces of engine grease that even industrial soap couldn't fully remove, clenched involuntarily at his sides. For 15 years he had assembled these very cars, pouring his soul into each engine, dreaming of the day he'd own one. Now, standing before his dream car, all those years of savings were being dismissed by a suit-clad salesman who couldn't even change his own oil. Around them, the showroom gleamed like a crystal palace, its polished marble floors reflecting the curves of exotic supercars worth more than most people's homes. The afternoon sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the metallic paint of a limited-edition sports car, the exact model the mechanic had helped perfect on the assembly line. In the corner, a man in a well-worn leather jacket paused his conversation with a sales representative, his attention drawn to the unfolding scene. Few recognized Christian Bale in his casual attire, but he recognized something else: raw injustice. The salesman's voice grew louder, performing now for his wealthy audience. "Perhaps you should stick to working on cars rather than dreaming about owning them." Laughter rippled through the showroom, sharp and cruel. But they had missed something crucial, the way the mechanic's eyes hadn't lingered on the car's sleek exterior, but had instead narrowed at the unique engine modification visible through the transparent hood. A modification he himself had installed, his personal signature on every engine of this model. The mechanic's name was James Mitchell, and for 15 years his hands had given life to the very engines that powered these dream machines. Every morning at 4 a.m. he would arrive at the factory, his toolbox heavy with precision instruments and his mind focused on perfection. His colleagues called him the artist for the way he treated each engine like a masterpiece, adding subtle optimizations that weren't in the manual but made each car purr just a little sweeter. He had saved every bonus, worked every overtime shift, lived in a modest apartment while others bought houses, all for this moment, standing before the car he had helped create. The salesman, Derek Wells, wore his $3,000 suit, like armor, his Rolex catching the light with every dismissive gesture. He had sold dozens of these cars to celebrities, CEOs, and trust fund heirs, and in his mind he could spot a real buyer from a dreamer within seconds. The other customers, drawn to the drama like moths to flame, formed a loose circle around the scene, their whispered comments and stifled laughs adding fuel to Wells's performance. "Sir, if you could just look at my bank statements." James reached for the folder in his weathered leather messenger bag, but Wells cut him off with a raised hand and an exaggerated sigh. A woman in a designer dress whispered something to her companion, and both exploded in poorly concealed laughter. The sound echoed off the showroom's glass walls, multiplying like a crowd's mockery. In the corner, Christian Bale shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. He had been examining a vintage model, discussing restoration details with another salesman, but his attention hadn't wavered from the scene unfolding across the showroom. Through his years of portraying both wealthy socialites and gritty underdogs, he had developed a keen eye for authentic character. The mechanic's calloused hands, the way he looked at the engine rather than the car's flashy exterior, the quiet dignity in his stance, everything about him spoke of genuine passion and hard-earned expertise. Wells was still performing, his voice carrying across the showroom like a theater actor's. "Perhaps we could interest you in something more appropriate for your station. The used car dealership down the street has some excellent options in your bracket." James's eyes never left the engine visible through the transparent hood. "That modification to the intake manifold," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "It's not standard. It's a custom optimization I developed 3 years ago. Increases horsepower by 3.8% while reducing fuel consumption. My signature is right there on the engine block. JM. Date stamped April 15th. The showroom's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Wells's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting to the engine, then back to James. A few of the laughing spectators shifted uncomfortably, the entertainment value of the scene suddenly tainted by an unexpected twist. Christian Bale had moved closer now, ostensibly examining another vehicle, but his attention was fully focused on the unfolding drama. He recognized the look in James's eyes. It was the same look he'd studied for months while preparing to play blue-collar workers and skilled craftsmen. It wasn't just knowledge in those eyes. It was love for the craft, pride in creation, and 15 years of dreams crystallized into cold determination. "I didn't come here to be sold a car," James continued, his voice gaining strength. "I came here to buy one I helped build." Wells recovered quickly, years of sales experience kicking in as he adjusted his strategy. "Anyone can memorize specifications from a brochure," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "And I'm sure working on an assembly line gives you some basic familiarity with the vehicles. But owning one of these masterpieces? That's an entirely different matter. These cars are more than just engines. They're symbols of success, of achievement. They belong to people who've reached a certain level in society." The words hung in the air like poison, but James didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his messenger bag again, this time pulling out a worn leather notebook. Its pages were filled with detailed sketches, calculations, and notes spanning 15 years of innovations. "Page 47, he said, opening the notebook to a series of intricate drawings. "That's the original design for the intake modification. Took me 2 years to perfect it. Every car in this model line since 2021 has my design under its hood, including this one." A young woman in the crowd, who had been recording the confrontation on her phone, stepped closer to peer at the notebook. Her eyes widened as she glanced between the detailed technical drawings and the engine visible through the transparent hood. Some of the other spectators were doing the same, the atmosphere in the showroom shifting as the reality of James's connection to these vehicles began to sink in. Christian Bale moved even closer, his experienced eye catching the subtle changes in the room's dynamic. The power was shifting, but Wells wasn't about to let go without a fight. Wells's face had taken on a reddish tinge as he watched his audience slipping away. "Security!" he called out, his voice slightly higher than before. "I believe this gentleman is disrupting our business environment." He turned to the gathering crowd, trying to reclaim control of the narrative. "Anyone can draw pictures in a notebook. Anyone can make claims. But this is a prestigious establishment, and we have standards to maintain." James carefully closed his notebook, his movements deliberate and calm. "You're right about one thing," he said, reaching into his bag one final time. "These cars are masterpieces. That's why every single person who works on them has to sign their name to their work. It's not just for quality control, it's about pride, about responsibility." He pulled out a worn employee ID card, the manufacturer's logo clearly visible. 15 years, 3 patents, and over 2,000 engines, each one signed, each one perfect. The security guard had arrived, but seemed unsure how to proceed, looking between Wells and James with hesitation. The young woman with the phone was now live-streaming, her commentary a whispered play-by-play. "And he actually helped build these cars. He's got proof. They're trying to throw him out." Christian Bale had seen enough. He recognized the moment when a scene needed its turning point, when justice demanded its entrance cue. As Wells opened his mouth to order the security guard into action, Bale stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a perfectly timed lighting cue. "You know what's interesting about method acting? Christian Bale's voice carried the same quiet intensity he brought to his most memorable roles. The crowd parted as he stepped forward, recognition rippling through the showroom. When you're preparing to play someone, really become them, you learn to spot the real thing. Wells's expression transformed instantly, celebrity client mode, engaging automatically. "Mr. Bale, I had no idea you were still here. Please, don't let this unfortunate disruption—" "I spent 6 months learning about Craftsman for The Machinist," Bale continued, as if Wells hadn't spoken. "Learned about their hands." He gestured to James's calloused fingers. "About their eyes." He nodded toward the engine James had been examining. "About the pride they take in their work, the kind of pride that makes a man sign his name to every piece he creates." The live streamer's phone followed Bale's movement as he walked over to the car's engine. "Right there," he said, pointing to a small engraving on the engine block. "J.M. April 15th, the signature of a master craftsman." He turned to Wells, his expression reminiscent of Patrick Bateman's controlled intensity. "You're right about one thing. These cars are symbols, but they're not symbols of wealth. They're symbols of excellence, of dedication, of men and women who pour their lives into creating perfection." The silence in the showroom was absolute. Even Wells seemed to have forgotten how to speak, his rehearsed sales pitch dying in his throat as he watched one of his most prestigious potential customers siding with the man he'd tried to throw out. The live stream counter ticked upward rapidly as thousands of viewers tuned in to watch the scene unfold. The young woman's hands trembled slightly as she tried to keep her phone steady, capturing every moment of Christian Bale's unexpected championing of the mechanic's cause. Comments flooded the stream. "Is that really Christian Bale? That salesman's about to get American psychoed. Wait till Twitter sees this." Bale walked over to James, his movements measured and deliberate. "That engine modification you designed," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's not just in these models, is it? I've got one of the earlier prototypes. Car never ran better." He turned to address the crowd, his voice taking on the commanding tone he'd perfected through years of iconic roles. "You want to know what real success looks like? It's not about wearing the right watch or driving the right car. It's about creating something so perfect that people like me pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to own it." Wells stood frozen, watching as his carefully maintained world of status symbols and social hierarchies crumbled around him. The security guard had backed away, trying to make himself invisible. Some of the wealthy customers who had been laughing earlier were now looking at their own vehicles with new eyes, wondering about the signatures hidden within their engines, about the craftsmen whose skill they had taken for granted. James stepped forward, his quiet dignity now radiating an authority that no designer suit could match. "Every car that leaves our factory carries a piece of our souls," he said, running his hand gently along the vehicle's hood. "We don't just build them, we breathe life into them. Each engine, each component, is a promise we make to the driver, a promise of excellence, of safety, of dreams made real through precision and dedication." The live stream comments exploded with support. "This is what real class looks like." "Someone hire this man to run the company?" "Had me crying in the garage, Aaron." Bale nodded appreciatively, recognizing the same passion he brought to his own craft. "You know," he said, addressing the showroom at large, "I've played billionaires and I've played working men. Want to know the real difference I found? It's not the clothes they wear or the cars they drive. It's whether they measure their worth by what they own or by what they create." Wells attempted one last desperate grasp at control. "Mr. Bale, surely you understand that our clientele expects a certain atmosphere, a certain exclusivity." "Exclusivity?" Bale's eyes flashed. "Let me tell you about exclusivity. This man has modified over 2,000 engines, each one unique, each one signed, each one a masterpiece. That's exclusive. That's special. And you're so busy looking at his clothes that you can't even see the artist standing in front of you. A new figure appeared from the back office, the dealership's owner, attracted by the commotion. His face paled as he recognized both Christian Bale and the viral disaster unfolding in his showroom. The live stream had reached over 50,000 viewers, and clips were already spreading across multiple platforms. "Mr. Mitchell," the owner said, surprising everyone by knowing James's name. "I had no idea you were coming in today. I've actually been meaning to contact you." He shot a withering glance at Wells. "Your engine modifications have become legendary among our high-performance clients. Several have specifically requested cars with your signature." James stood straighter, 15 years of pride finally receiving its due. "I'm here to buy the car I helped perfect," he said firmly. "I've got the funds, the knowledge to maintain it, and more importantly, I've earned it." "Of course you have," Bale interjected, turning to the owner. "In fact, I'd like to see Mr. Mitchell handle my next vehicle purchase as well. Seems to me you've got the wrong man selling these cars, and the right man being turned away from buying them." The owner's business sense kicked in immediately. "Mr. Mitchell, would you be interested in a position as our high-performance specialist? We could certainly use someone with your expertise and passion." Wells's face had turned the color of expensive leather as he watched his carefully constructed world of social hierarchies collapse. The wealthy customers who had laughed earlier now couldn't meet James's eyes, their own reflections in the showroom's glass surfaces suddenly uncomfortable to face. The next hour transformed the showroom into a different world. James sat behind his dream car's wheel, not as a hopeful buyer, but as its new owner, while Christian Bale leaned against the hood discussing engine modifications with the kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for discussing challenging roles. The live stream continued, capturing the moment James handed over the cashier's check he'd been ready to present all along. 15 years, James said softly, running his hands along the steering wheel. Every overtime shift, every bonus, every extra hour spent perfecting these engines, it was all for this moment. He reached out and touched the engine block where his signature was engraved. The gesture was intimate, like an artist signing a masterpiece. The owner had personally handled the paperwork, while Wells had been quietly escorted to the back office. The young woman who'd been live streaming wiped tears from her eyes as she captured James starting the engine for the first time, the pure, powerful sound of a machine responding to its creator's touch. By evening, the video had gone viral across multiple platforms. To respect, The Craft and Daquatnos James Mitchell were trending, with millions sharing their own stories of craftsmen and artists being judged by their appearances rather than their skills. The manufacturer itself issued a statement celebrating their craftspeople, highlighting the signature program that James had mentioned, and announcing a new initiative to connect customers directly with the masters who built their vehicles. Christian Bale's words about worth being measured by creation rather than possession became a rallying cry, shared and reshared across social media. Car enthusiast forums exploded with discussions about James's engine modifications, with owners proudly posting photos of their own vehicles' signature plates, finally understanding the true value of what they possessed. The dealership's owner, recognizing the shifting tide, announced a complete overhaul of their sales approach. The new program would emphasize the craftsmanship behind each vehicle, with James heading a team of technical specialists who would bridge the gap between the creators and customers of these mechanical masterpieces. A month later, James Mitchell's story had become a touchstone for change in the luxury car industry. The signed engine program had expanded, with manufacturers across the globe adopting similar practices of highlighting their master craftsmen. But perhaps the most profound change could be seen in the showroom itself, where James now spent his weekends. He'd kept his job at the factory. "You can't sell the art if you stop creating it," he'd explained to Christian Bale during one of their regular chats about engine innovation. But on weekends, he could be found in the showroom, dressed in his work clothes, proudly showing customers the craftsmanship behind their dream cars. The wealthy clients who once might have dismissed him now listened intently as he explained the subtle artistry hidden beneath each hood. "Every signature on these engines tells a story," he would say, his calloused fingers tracing the engraved initials that had become a symbol of authentic value. Not just of the car, but of the dreams, dedication, and dignity of the people who build them. Because true luxury isn't about who can buy it, it's about who can create it.